It doesn't matter what you do. Don't even bother trying. This'll never work for me. You might as well give up now. Sometimes our mind produces thoughts like this. And these thoughts can be absolutely devastating because they almost become self-fulfilling prophecies. Once we believe that we're incapable of success, it becomes really hard to find the motivation to even try. As we've learned from things like the action success calculation, a big part of our motivation actually comes from our confidence in the ability to succeed. Our mind doesn't bother generating energy towards actions that will be futile. The question still remains that if your mind tells you things like this, where does this come from? How does this work? And what can you do about it? So the first thing to understand is the scientific principle of the placebo effect. So this is a really fascinating scientific discovery, but essentially in clinical medicine, we've discovered that if a patient believes in a treatment, that treatment is more likely to be successful. And there's a brilliant researcher named Ted Kaptchuk who's gone into this in so much detail to the point where he'll even tell patients, I'm going to give you a sugar pill. There's nothing actually in this pill, but then he explains the placebo effect to them. He actually tells them, we have a ton of scientific evidence which shows us that if you believe this pill will work for you, it'll actually work for you. And then he actually gives them the sugar pill after explaining that there's nothing actually in it, but also telling them that I believe that this pill is going to help you. And it actually ends up helping them. The placebo effect is so powerful that even if we know it exists, but we still have faith in the treatment, it actually succeeds. Unfortunately, the opposite is also true, and this is what we call the nocebo effect. If a patient does not believe in a treatment, even if that treatment has a biological therapeutic effect, the effect of that treatment is actually going to be diminished based on the patient's beliefs. And unfortunately, I've seen that as a psychiatrist. Sometimes I'll get people in my office who come in and they'll say, I've seen 10 other psychiatrists and none of them have ever been able to help me. And so I hope you'll be able to help me, but nothing has worked for me in the past. And I know as a clinician that if someone comes into the door believing that I'm not going to be able to help them, it becomes really, really hard to help them. Unfortunately, this principle of placebo effect and nocebo effect also applies to areas outside of clinical medicine. If your mind starts populating thoughts in your head with, it doesn't matter what you do, don't bother trying, you're doomed to failure, that will actually become a self-fulfilling prophecy. We can see that in the case of something like a job interview, where if you don't believe you're actually capable of getting the job, how do you think that affects your performance in an interview? If you go into a job interview believing and your mind is constantly telling you there's no way they're going to hire you, there's no way they're going to hire you, you're incompetent, I'm sure they have 1,000 better candidates, how do you think you project? How do you think you present yourself to the person who's interviewing you? It'll affect your tone, it'll affect your body language, it'll affect your confidence. Even the perception of competence that you have gets empathically transmitted to the interviewer. And so your beliefs that that you won't succeed will actually affect your chances of success. So where does this all come from? What's going on here? All of these thoughts of it doesn't matter what you do or don't bother actually come from the emotional seed of powerlessness or hopelessness. At some point, you probably felt some kind of emotion that, okay, this isn't going to work for me. And then what happens is as you make an attempt, that attempt becomes plagued with the nocebo effect. And so then what happens is you fail. And if you fail, what it actually does is go back and reinforces this samskar. Now you have data to support that you won't be successful. And then you build up your willpower and you force yourself to try again. You go into another job interview. But this time you have the specter of your previous failure with you. And as you come into the room, you're afraid that you won't get the job. And by the way, you didn't get the last job, so why would you get this job? And so you're more down on yourself, you lack even greater confidence, and so you don't get the second job. And then the third job that you try, the same thing happens over and over and over again. And the samskar becomes strengthened. And as the samskar becomes strengthened, the size of those thoughts in your head become greater as well. Don't even bother, because you're not someone who's a winner. And then your motivation tanks, and then you're kind of stuck. So how can we overcome this samskar? Where does it come from, and what can we do about it? The key thing to understand is that this samskara is rooted in an emotion like powerlessness or hopelessness. And the key question you have to ask yourself is, when did you actually give up hope? Because your mind may tell you that, oh, the reason I believe this is because I failed 10 times. But what was your attitude when you went into the first job interview? And I've seen this as a clinician, because when patients come into my office and they say, psychiatry has never worked for me, the question that I ask them is, what did you think about psychiatry before you saw your first psychiatrist? And inevitably what I find is that they doubted psychiatry to begin with. The reason that they've given up hope is not because they failed 10 times, it's because they lost it before they even started. They didn't believe in themselves before they even took their first step forward. So the key thing to do if you have this samskara is, first of all, catch the thought when it happens. Notice that your mind will populate with these thoughts, but that those thoughts aren't necessarily true. The second thing that you have to do is really ask yourself this question: when did you give up hope? And don't give in to the first answer that your mind tells you, because your mind will tell you, oh yeah, the reason I've given up hope is because I've failed 10 times. You need to be a little bit more critical, because chances are the seed of this failure, the seed of this hopelessness, actually precedes your first attempt. And as you find the real source of this problem, you can start the process of emotionally digesting it. As you emotionally digest it, you can start to reframe your perspective. That actually the first reason that I didn't get the job interview is because I didn't have confidence in myself before I even started. And the reason that I didn't succeed is because I lacked confidence in myself. And something magical happens then. Suddenly, instead of this being deterministic, instead of this being your destiny of failure, what you start to realize is your success or failure actually depends on your confidence and nothing else. And so when you're dealing with this samskara, we want to sort of do a 1-2 punch. We want to catch its action in the present and not sort of give into it. And at the same time, we sort of want to decrease the emotional energy through which it was formed. If you can do these two things, chances are you can start to become a little bit unstuck. You can increase your motivation, and most importantly, you can actually try things in sort of a fair and confident way.